It's time to introduce Entity Framework Core and learn how to build database-driven applications with it. We will begin by writing our first ORM model in this video. Entity Framework Core is an ORM, an object relational mapper. It works by mapping the properties of a plain JavaScript object called model to an actual database table. This is why it's called an ORM. Let's go ahead and find it in the NuGet package manager and install it. We're going to need the Microsoft.EntityFramework Core package, but not just this one. We will be working with an SQL Server database. Therefore, we also need a connector so that Entity Framework Core can connect to that specific version of a database. EF Core is compatible with various different relational databases like MySQL or PostgreSQL. SQL Server is one of them, and it's actually the one that is mostly used with the Microsoft stack and C# and any other .NET related technologies, so we're going to stick with it. And this is going to be the second package that we need to install. Once this is done, we can go ahead and create a models folder where we will place the models that we will then later map into database entities. So there you go. We just created a user model. In order to be able to communicate with Entity Framework Core, we need an app.db context. Now, a database context is actually a file that describes the connection to the database. It needs to inherit from the db context base class that we can retrieve by importing the Microsoft.EntityFramework Core namespace. In the constructor, we need to pass the db context options that are a generic class with one type argument that needs to be the class that we're building, so app.db context there. And we need to pass that to the base class constructor using the base keyword. And now we're ready. Now in this class, we need to define the database tables that need to be created using the dbSet class. So we need a table of users, so we need to specify a dbSet with the type argument being the user class. We can now go back to the user class and start implementing it. We're going to use properties. This is just plain C#. We want to let Entity Framework Core know that this is the primary key, so we're going to use the key attribute. There are different ways to have the same result. One of them is to use attributes like this. The other one is to use the Fluent API, but we will talk about the Fluent API later in this section. The first name is a required attribute. Obviously, the ID is as well, but let's be explicit, it's not needed. Also, we can say something like we want the first name to have at least 2 characters and be at most 32 characters long. We can have and use the same attributes for defining a last name property. So this is going to be required as well, and it's going to have a min length of 2 and a max length of 32. Then we have an email address. All registered users should have an email address, which should be required, and it should be formatted as an email address. So a string that doesn't adhere to the general regular expression that describes an email address would be rejected. And then finally, we need a password. Just that. Let's not just specify the min and max length for the password. Let's just keep it required. So this is the model, our first ORM model to work with Entity Framework Core.